My son-in-law leaned back in his chair, smirking over a glass of expensive red wine. "How does it feel to be a useless old man?" he sneered. My daughter Linda stared down at her plate, silent and ashamed. They thought retirement made me weak. What they didn't know, I'd financed their million-dollar lifestyle, and tonight I finally cut the cord. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. The late afternoon light slanted across my study, filling the room with that familiar amber glow that always reminded me of Helen's laughter on summer evenings. The shelves were lined with decades of books, tax files, and photographs that told the story of my life, though now they felt more like silent witnesses to my foolish generosity. I pulled open the drawer of my oak desk, the one I had bought 30 years ago when I first believed I was building something permanent for my family. My hands shook slightly as I laid out the folders that held receipts, contracts, and mortgage statements. Each page was another piece of evidence, another reminder of the sacrifices I had made. $3,000 every month for 15 years to keep this roof over their heads. That added up to more than $500,000 just in payments. $450 a month for the car Linda insisted she needed, reliable and safe, though I never drove it myself. $25,000 for the kitchen remodel because she dreamed of hosting friends like the women she envied. And then there was the $20,000 I spent on that family vacation, the one where Brian complained about the hotel service while I smiled through it, thinking the memories would bind us closer. I pressed my thumb into the folder, whispering into the empty room as if Helen were still sitting in her favorite armchair across from me. "Helen, you told me to take care of Linda. You said she would always need her father's steady hand. But you didn't know, my love. You didn't know they would turn me into a bank account, a machine to drain." The words dissolved into the silence, and I felt a sting in my chest. The weight of my house pressed on me more heavily than the mortgage ever had. $500,000, that was its current value, maybe more in this neighborhood. It was the last significant thing I held, the anchor of my life, the one place where Helen's voice still lingered in the hallways. I thought of the savings accounts that once gave me comfort, the retirement fund I had carefully built, and how it had been chipped away, first for Brian's business venture, then for Linda's student loans, then for every little crisis that seemed to appear whenever they knocked on my door. That nest egg, once a cushion of over $200,000, had dwindled to barely enough to cover emergencies. And the worst loss wasn't even the money, wasn't even. It was the erosion of the bond between father and daughter. I could still hear the first "thank you, Dad" when I helped her buy her first apartment furniture. But that gratitude shifted, somewhere along the line, into entitlement. "You have to help us," she said last winter when Brian lost his job again. Not asked. Demanded. The word "must" burned hotter than any insult. My home had become less of a refuge and more of a battleground where every photo frame and every piece of furniture reminded me of the distance growing between us. I sat there, numb, the shock from the night before still echoing in my mind. To discover that Brian and Linda were not only discussing selling the house, but were already looking at nursing homes for me. It cut deeper than any betrayal I had imagined. I could almost see Helen's face at her funeral when I promised her I would protect Linda until she was strong enough to stand on her own. That was 15 years ago. 15 years of endless giving, endless covering for her mistakes, endless support for her choices. But she never stood. She leaned. And now, with Brian at her side, she wasn't leaning. She was pushing me out altogether. The memory of Brian's smirk when he thought I wasn't looking replayed like a cruel trick of the mind. And Linda? She didn't defend me, not even once. She stood there, nodding, agreeing with his words, as though her father was just another obstacle to their future. The pain in that realization felt worse than losing Helen all over again. It wasn't just money. It was the crumbling of a bond I had spent my whole life nurturing. But as the silence stretched on, I felt something shifting inside me. The grief hardened into something sharper, something almost steadying. First came the disbelief, then the sorrow, then the anger that burned hot enough to make my hands tremble. And after the anger came a clarity I hadn't felt in years. If I continued down this path, if I allowed myself to be manipulated further, I would end my life as a discarded burden. That could not happen. Helen would not want that for me. I would not want that for myself. For decades, I believed my role was to give, to sacrifice, to hold the weight of everyone else's needs. But now I saw the truth. They had mistaken my generosity for weakness. They had built their lives not around gratitude, but around expectation. And for the first time, I understood that I still had a choice. My back straightened in the chair, my hands steadied as I touched the folders again. "No more," I whispered. The words tasted different, heavier, but also liberating. This was no longer about helping them. This was about survival, dignity, and reclaiming my authority. I pulled out the documents I hadn't looked at in years. The life insurance policy, untouched since Helen passed, her name still scrawled in the beneficiary line. The deed to the house, crisp and official, with my name still the only one that mattered. Old bank ledgers that mapped out decades of payments, sacrifices, and unacknowledged labor. I began to write on a notepad, listing every contribution I had made. The numbers startled even me when they piled up on the page. $982,400. Nearly $1 million given and spent over the years, carved out of my sweat, my long nights, my careful planning. I stared at the total until the digits blurred. This was more than generosity. This was proof, undeniable proof, that I had fulfilled every obligation as a father, and far beyond. No one, not even Linda, could call me selfish. No one could accuse me of failing her. The evidence was here, black ink on white paper. "This is my defense," I muttered. "This is the truth no one can erase." The room around me carried me back through time. The wedding portrait of Helen and me above the mantel, where her veil seemed almost to glow in the fading light. The grandfather clock that had ticked through every argument and every celebration, still keeping perfect rhythm as if mocking the chaos in my heart. The worn recliner where Helen once sat to knit, its fabric faded from years of sun through the window. Every corner of this space whispered of the life we had built, the sacrifices we had made, the dreams we once shared. And yet those same corners also seemed to accuse me, to remind me of how easily it could all be taken if I remained passive. I pressed my hand against the wall, feeling the cool paint under my palm, and thought of all the nights I had fallen asleep here, certain that my family was safe. That certainty was gone. What remained was determination. This house was more than wood and brick. It was the last fortress of my dignity. I could not, would not let it fall into ungrateful hands. As the grandfather clock struck 7, I gathered the papers into a neat stack and set them squarely on the desk. The weight of them felt less like a burden and more like a weapon, a tool, sharp and undeniable. I looked at Helen's portrait and spoke aloud, my voice steady this time. "It's beginning, Helen. The game they wanted to play. It starts now, but this time I won't be the fool." I felt her absence like a shadow, yet in that moment her spirit seemed closer than ever, urging me forward. I leaned back, exhaled, and knew the course was set. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, perhaps even war. But tonight, for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel something other than grief. I felt ready. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke to quiet and to purpose. A pale strip of morning cut through the blinds and lay across my desk, right over the folder where last night I wrote the total, $982,400. I said the number once, set my coffee beside it, and listened to the faithful tick of the clock. For years I greeted mornings with worry. Not today. Today I would move, call, close, and protect. I wrote the date at the top of my notebook and whispered, "Helen, I'm doing this now." First National opened at 8. I dialed with a steady hand and pressed through the cheerful menu. After the security questions, I asked to cancel every automatic payment on my checking account ending in 1456. Mortgage, tuition, health insurance, car leases, utilities. If any company tried to pull a dollar without my say-so, the bank was to block it. The representative read each debit and paused. $3,000 on the 1st for the mortgage, $450 on the 15th for the car, $900 each quarter for school programs, $200 for the utility bundle. After each item, she said, "Canceled," and gave me a confirmation code. I repeated the numbers back and wrote them down in neat columns. When she asked whether I wanted to keep anything active, I said no. She went quiet for a moment and then said she wished me a good day. I thanked her and told her the good part had already started. When I hung up, my hand did not shake. It felt like it had been waiting for this call for years. Next, I called Mountain Health. I had covered the family plan for so long that the card on file felt like a tattoo. The agent tried to make small talk about the weather, and I let her, then guided us to the point. Please remove my card from the family account, and please note that no charges are authorized on any account that bears my name unless I initiate them myself. She read back the last 4 digits and confirmed the change. Another code went into the notebook. I pictured Helen teasing me about my neat lines and careful boxes. "You were born for ledgers," she used to say. "Ledgers and long roads." I smiled at the memory and underlined the new entries. The ink looked almost like a fence line, dark and simple. By 9:30, I had a thin stack of fresh printouts and a feeling I had not known in years. I slid them into a manila folder and wrote "Today" across the tab. I made eggs and toast, ate at the counter, and let the routine steady me. The phone rang. Linda's name filled the screen. She asked why the mortgage had failed and what she should tell the bank. I told her the truth. Starting today, those bills are hers, not mine. She asked if I had misunderstood Brian. I said I had heard him perfectly. She asked if I was angry. I told her anger was not the point. Responsibility was. She said timing was bad with a promotion, a roof leak, and tuition. I said timing is always bad when people hope money will appear from nowhere. I promised to help the children directly, not a dollar more for an adult lifestyle. Then I hung up and stood at the sink until the water ran cool. Brian called within 15 minutes. He did not ask how I was. He lifted his voice to the place he thinks sounds like authority and told me I could not cancel payments that involved the whole family. He said it was tradition for elders to support the young until they were established. He said we had an understanding. I let him finish. Then I asked him to email me the contract where I had agreed to fund his life forever. He sputtered about respect. I kept my tone level. If you have a document, send it. If you do not, stop speaking to me like I owe you anything but the truth. He said there would be consequences, and his voice rose on the last word like a boy trying to sound taller. I told him that consequences are what grown people face when bills arrive. Then I ended the call. I straightened the receipts, tucked my check registers into the safe, and copied the confirmation numbers onto index cards. One card went into the safe behind the desk. One went into the Today folder. One went into my wallet. Old engineers believe in redundancy, and I am no exception. I wrote down the deed number and the date of the last appraisal, $500,000 even. The house had become a symbol to Brian, a stage for his speeches about success. To me, it was a promise to Helen that our years together would not be sold for anyone's convenience. I ran a hand along the desk edge and felt the groove I made with a belt buckle during a long phone meeting the year Linda was born. History leaves marks you can touch. At 11, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Linda stood there with Emma and Tommy tight against her sides. Emma held a stuffed rabbit by one ear. Tommy stared at his sneakers. The porch smelled like the sun on wood. I stepped back and let them in, and the living room looked the way it always did, but everything inside me had shifted. Linda spoke quickly, as if speed could solve this. The bank called again. The school called, the utility company emailed. She said it all like weather, like a storm that arrives on its own. I listened and nodded. Then I said we would talk about adult matters without an audience, and I looked at the children and smiled. Emma tugged my sleeve. Her voice was soft and careful, as if someone had coached the edges. "Grandpa," Mommy said, "you don't love us anymore." For a second, the air left my lungs. Not because she accused me, but because someone had used those words to press a child into a shape that did not belong to her. I crouched so we were eye to eye. "Sweetheart, do not let anyone put those words in your mouth. I love you. I have always loved you. I am stopping something that hurts all of us, even if it looks like love from far away." Her face changed the way a sky changes when a cloud moves. She nodded and hugged me. Tommy lifted his eyes and met mine, and I saw the question there. "Are we going to be okay?" And I answered with a slow nod that meant yes, but differently. Linda said she had not meant it like that she had been upset, that Brian had been talking fast and saying big things about promotions and reputation and momentum. I heard every excuse, and none of them touched the center of the thing. I told her we would not discuss money in front of the children. I told her I would always help Emma and Tommy directly with school, with cleats and coats, with dentist bills, with piano lessons. I told her I would not pay another dollar toward grown-up lifestyle expenses. She started to cry and then stopped herself. I walked them to the door and kissed the children on the head. When the door closed, the house felt like itself again. After they left, the house exhaled. I let the anger cool into something clean, picked up the Today folder, and drove across town to see my attorney, Arthur Lane. His office sits above the hardware store, 2 flights up, with a view of Main Street and a Rotary certificate on the wall. I told him the broad strokes, years of payments, last night's insult, this morning's cancellations. He read my totals, nodded once, and said I had every right to stop. He recommended alerts on my credit, purchase notifications, and a clause in my will clarifying that any future help was strictly at my discretion. He kept his language plain and practical, which helped more than sympathy would have. He reminded me to document everything, to store copies in separate places, and to keep conversations short. When I left, he said, "Call if they show up tonight." I said, "They will." We shook hands like men who understood the next part would not be polite. On the way home, I stopped at the bank and asked to see the manager. She greeted me like a neighbor and led me into a glass office with a view of the lot and a framed photo of the staff picnic. I explained what I had done and asked for more safeguards. She added a note requiring in-person verification for any new automatic links, set daily withdrawal alerts to ping my phone, and printed a summary of changes with today's stamp. I slid it into the folder. Before I left, I withdrew a small amount of cash, tucked it in my wallet, and felt the old habit of preparedness settle back on my shoulders. Outside, the wind lifted the flag over the post office. I stood for a moment and watched it, the cloth pulling and easing like the day. The afternoon settled into a waiting kind of quiet. I made a sandwich and ate it standing up at the sink. The maple shifted light across the counter like a slow clock. Back in the study, I sorted papers into 3 stacks: legal, financial, and personal. In the personal stack, I found a photograph of Helen at the county fair, holding a blue ribbon pie, laughing so hard her eyes were almost closed. I laughed too, one short burst, and felt the room change temperature. On a fresh page, I wrote a budget for myself: property taxes, utilities, groceries, a photography class at the senior center, a weekend drive with a motel, and an ice machine that never quits. Planning for myself felt like waking up muscles I had let sleep for years. Dusk came early, or it felt that way. I watered the fern in the corner, checked the locks, and turned on the porch light. I was washing my coffee mug when the doorbell rang again. A heavy press, not a polite tap. Through the glass, I saw Brian's shoulders bunched tight and Linda standing a step behind him. I opened the door and did not move from the threshold. Cool air curled around our ankles. Brian said we needed to resolve this tonight. He used words like irresponsible and cruel, big words he throws when he wants to make a cage around a person and call it duty. I said we would talk tomorrow morning. He stepped forward and stopped when my hand rose. Not tonight. Tomorrow. 9 o'clock. Bring your documents and your respect. Not tonight, I said, and my voice surprised even me with how steady it was. Tomorrow at 9, with respect and documents. He did not like the word respect. He tried a softer tone, talked about stress, about leaks and tuition, about what a good father would do. Linda said my name like a plea. I kept my hands at my sides and spoke the truth I had finally allowed. I would not be their solution anymore. We will talk tomorrow, I said. Bring what you owe, bring what you can prove, and bring your listening. Then I closed the door gently. They stepped back, frustrated by a door that no longer swung their way. The porch light caught dust in the air like slow snow. I closed the door and set the deadbolt. I stood for a moment with my hand on the wood and listened to the car start, the tires crunch on the gravel, and the sound fade. Grief and relief arrived together, neither canceling the other. Then I did one more thing. I opened the safe, took out the deed, and put it at the front of the Today folder. The paper felt heavier than it looked. I breathed once, steady. Whatever came tomorrow, this house would not be signed away in confusion or guilt. Before bed, I left a message for Arthur so there would be a timestamp. This is Thomas Bennett. The cancellations are complete. Please call at 9 to review alerts, freezes, and any additional protections for the house. I hung up and stood in the doorway of the study, looking at the old recliner where Helen used to sit and joke about the weather reports. The grandfather clock ticked in the corner, measuring out a new life in small, even seconds. I turned off the lamp and let the hallway hold me for a breath. When I finally lay down, the house made the same faithful sounds it had made the night Helen came home from the hospital and insisted she wanted her pillow, her window, her soap. I spoke to the ceiling as if she could hear me. They think I am weak because I am old. They think tired means finished. They think money is love. They are wrong. Love is boundaries and truth. Dignity is paid for in decisions, not gifts. I could hear the knock, the breath before the demand, the rustle of paper. They will bring confidence. I will bring proof and a boundary. Tomorrow. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment too below to let me know you're here with me. I had always believed that betrayal cuts deepest not from strangers, but from those who share your blood. A thief on the street can rob you of your wallet, but your child can rob you of your dignity. That night, as I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the folder of documents I had gathered, the weight of betrayal pressed down on me like a stone. Trevor, my son, had been planning to strip me of everything, my home, my accounts, even my freedom. He wanted me weakened, dependent, and silent. But he had underestimated one thing. The years hadn't dulled my mind, and I still knew how to fight. The morning light crept through the curtains, spilling across the oak dresser that had been my wife's pride. I touched the surface absent-mindedly, feeling the groove she had polished 1,000 times. She was gone now, and perhaps that absence was what emboldened Trevor to move against me. He thought I had no fight left in me. But he was wrong. Grief can paralyze a man, or it can forge him into something unbreakable. I chose the latter. I put on my jacket, the one with the deep inside pocket where I had hidden the flash drive. It contained emails, contracts, and forged documents Trevor had carelessly left on my desk when he believed I was too frail to notice. Proof of his scheme to redirect my pension and siphon the family business into his control. I had also spoken with an old friend, Martin, a lawyer I had trusted for decades, who confirmed what I already suspected. Trevor's plan wasn't just cruel, it was criminal. And now I was ready to confront him. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. Trevor stormed into my house without knocking, his confidence rehearsed, his tone sharpened like a blade. "Dad, I need you to sign these papers today," he demanded, slamming a folder onto the dining table. His eyes carried no warmth, no hesitation, only greed. I looked at the papers. They were thick with legal jargon, but the essence was simple. I would transfer control of my accounts to him for management purposes. My home would be placed in a family trust, with Trevor as executor, and my medical decisions would rest entirely in his hands. In short, he wanted me to sign away my life. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from rage. I folded my glasses, set them carefully on the table, and stared at him. "Trevor," I said, my voice steady, "do you even hear yourself? Do you realize what you're asking?" He sneered. "I'm protecting you. You're old, Dad. You don't see it, but you're slipping. This way, everything's safe. No mistakes, no scams, no surprises. Just stability. Trust me." Trust. The word cracked like a whip. My granddaughter had begged me to trust her days earlier, and it had saved me from disaster. Trevor now used the same word, but twisted it, poisoned it. My jaw tightened. "No," I said simply. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. His eyes narrowed. "Don't be foolish. If you don't sign, the business will fall apart. The house, the accounts, it'll all be wasted." "That house," I shot back, "was built brick by brick with my own hands. That business kept food on this family's table for 40 years. And you think I'll hand it over because you say I'm old?" Trevor's smirk faltered, but only for a moment. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You don't have a choice. I've already moved some funds. By next month, the accounts will show me as a co-owner. The papers are just a formality." I felt the air leave my lungs, the audacity, the arrogance. My son had already begun stealing from me, confident I would either be too weak or too blind to notice. No, that deep burning fury rose in my chest, but I didn't explode. Not yet. I smiled instead, a slow, deliberate smile that unsettled him. "I see," I said calmly. "Then let's make this formal." He blinked, confused. That was when I opened my jacket and placed the flash drive on the table. "Every email, every contract, every transaction you touched, I've saved it. Martin has copies. The authorities will too if I disappear suddenly or my accounts move without my permission. So go ahead, Trevor. Push me. But understand this, you're not the only one who knows how to play the game." His face drained of color. For the first time, I saw fear creep into his expression. He tried to laugh it off, shaking his head. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "You've always mistaken my silence for weakness. But silence is a strategy. I gave you rope, Trevor, and you've wrapped it around your neck." He stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "You can't do this. I'm your son." That word, son, rang hollow. A son protects, cherishes, and honors. A thief in your blood is still a thief. I rose slowly, feeling the years in my bones but the fire in my chest. A son does not betray his father for money. You stopped being my son the moment you planned this. The room quaked with the force of our words. My granddaughter, drawn by the noise, appeared at the doorway. Her wide eyes darted between us. Trevor's expression softened briefly when he saw her, but I recognized it for what it was: performance. She had been the one to warn me, to drag me out of harm's way when Trevor's plan had nearly sprung on me. Now she stood as witness. "Grandpa?" she whispered. I nodded. "It's all right, sweetheart. The truth is out." Trevor clenched his fists, then stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. But I knew this wasn't over. Men like him don't surrender easily. He would lick his wounds, regroup, and come back stronger, which meant I had to be ready. And so began the true battle. Over the next weeks, I fortified my defenses. Martin filed injunctions to freeze suspicious transfers. I moved the title of my home into a trust, not Trevor's, but one managed by a neutral third party. I contacted old business partners, warning them not to sign anything with Trevor. Each action was a nail in the coffin of his scheme. But Trevor fought back. He sent letters through lawyers, dripping with threats. He spread rumors among relatives, painting me as senile, paranoid, and unfit. The family dinners became battlegrounds, with whispers replacing laughter. My daughter Linda, torn between loyalty to her husband and her father, sat in painful silence. Her eyes begged me not to force her hand, but betrayal had already carved its scar. Neutrality was no longer an option. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon. Trevor arrived again, but this time with two men in suits, lawyers, sharp and polished. They carried briefcases like weapons. "We're here to settle this," Trevor announced, his tone triumphant. "You can either sign peacefully or we can let the courts decide." I felt my pulse steady. This was the moment. I gestured to the living room, where Martin was already waiting, calm as a stone. Trevor faltered when he saw him. "What is this?" "My lawyer," I replied smoothly. "I thought it best we handle this properly." The air crackled with tension as both sides sat across from each other. Papers rustled, voices rose, accusations flew. But when Martin laid the flash drive on the table and began reading aloud Trevor's incriminating emails, the room shifted. The lawyers stiffened, glancing nervously at their client. Trevor's bravado cracked. "You set me up," he spat. "No," I said quietly. "You set yourself up. I simply refused to be your victim." By the end of the day, Trevor's lawyers advised him to back down. The evidence was damning, the risk too high. He left in silence, his shoulders hunched, his empire of lies collapsing. Linda wept quietly in the corner, torn apart by the man she married and the father she nearly lost. My granddaughter clung to my hand, her small fingers reminding me why I had fought so hard. That night, alone in my study, I stared at the documents that proved my survival. Relief washed over me, but so did sorrow. I had defended my home, my accounts, my dignity, but at the cost of my son. The boy I once carried on my shoulders had grown into a man who saw me as prey. That truth would never stop hurting. Yet there was a strange peace, too. I had not been silenced. I had not been erased. I had stood my ground, and in doing so, I had reclaimed not just my property, but my sense of self. The betrayal had carved scars, yes, but scars are proof of survival. And as I turned off the lamp, I whispered into the quiet house, "This chapter is over, but my story is not." If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. I remember the day I walked away from my old house for the last time. The moving truck was already parked by the curb, its back doors yawning open, the men inside stacking the last of the boxes I had chosen to take with me. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass, the kind you get when a neighbor insists on mowing, even in the early morning. I stood there, holding the envelope that carried the official papers, the donation agreement that sealed everything. That house, the one they thought they could wrestle away from me, now belonged to the foundation that was going to turn it into transitional housing for veterans. It was no longer a pawn in their scheme, no longer bait for their greed. It was out of their reach forever. I looked at the porch where Linda once played with her dolls, the railing Brian had leaned against when he first came courting all those years ago. It should have been a place of warmth and continuity. Instead, it had become the center of betrayal, of whispers behind my back, of plans that never considered me a father, a man, or even a human being with a heart. They had reduced me to an obstacle in their eyes, something standing in the way of an inheritance. But I had ended that game, and now it was time to watch the dust settle. The very first sign of consequence came quicker than even I expected. A week after the transfer was finalized, I heard from a neighbor that a foreclosure notice had been plastered right on Linda and Brian's front door. Bold red letters screamed across the page, visible to every passerby. It said the bank was taking back the house they had leveraged to the hilt, using loans to fund their lifestyle of endless vacations, leased luxury cars, and private school tuition they thought they would never have to worry about paying. The illusion cracked, and when it cracked, It fell hard. Brian's BMW, the one he always made sure to park diagonally so everyone would notice the gleaming paint job, disappeared from the driveway one morning. I didn't need to ask where it went. I knew the bank had sent a tow truck, rolling away the symbol of his pride and arrogance. He had strutted around that car like it proved something, like it made him a man worth respecting. And now it was gone, just like his inflated reputation. Linda, my daughter, who once carried herself like she was above every responsibility, was spotted behind the register at a local grocery store, a cashier ringing up milk and bread for families who lived within their means. I could picture the forced smile, the way her eyes darted downward whenever someone from the neighborhood recognized her. She had built her identity around entitlement, and now life was teaching her the value of humility in the most public way. As for Brian, the whispers grew louder in the community. People talked. Neighbors who once nodded with admiration now shook their heads with pity or disgust. The story had gotten out about how he and Linda had tried to corner me, how they had schemed for the house, how I had beaten them at their own game by giving it away. In a town like ours, reputation is currency, and Brian had gone bankrupt. His smirk, that smug curve of the lips he used to wear like armor, was nowhere to be seen. He avoided people, kept his head down. For a man who once thrived on image, losing face was perhaps the cruelest punishment of all. Meanwhile, I began to breathe again. My days were lighter, free from the weight of their demands, their constant manipulations, the endless bleeding of my bank account. I sat down with my financial advisor, and for the first time in years, I redirected money back into my retirement fund instead of funneling it toward their fantasies. I saw the numbers grow, small but steady, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: security. I also began something new, something for myself. Photography had always fascinated me, but I had never given myself the chance. So I signed up for a community class at the senior center. The first day I walked in with my second-hand camera, nervous as a schoolboy, I was greeted by smiles, by people who wanted to learn just as much as I did. The click of the shutter became music to me. I photographed trees bending in the wind, the wrinkled but kind faces of classmates, even the quiet details of my new apartment, sunlight spilling across the kitchen counter, steam rising from a morning cup of coffee. Each image reminded me that beauty could be found in simplicity. And I traveled, nothing extravagant, just short trips. A bus ride to the coast where I stood with sand under my shoes, the ocean air filling my lungs. A train ride upstate where autumn leaves painted the hills in gold and crimson. These small adventures stitched color back into my life, pieces of joy that money could never buy. The contrast between my world and theirs grew sharper with each passing day. I lived in a modest apartment overlooking a small park. From my window, I watched children chase each other, their laughter spilling into the air. On weekends, I joined neighbors in the courtyard, sharing coffee and stories. I slept soundly at night without the gnawing anxiety of who would call asking for money, without the guilt of enabling behavior that was slowly poisoning my soul. Linda and Brian, on the other hand, wrestled with bills and late fees. Their voices grew strained. Word reached me through others. They fought more often, the kind of fights that left doors slamming and silence stretching for hours. They were learning, perhaps too late, that life without discipline is a hard road. They were discovering what it meant to work for every dollar, to earn instead of expect. Sometimes I would catch myself wondering if I should have pity. After all, Linda was my daughter. I remembered her first steps, her laughter as a child, the nights I sat by her bed when she was sick. That bond can never fully disappear. And yet, pity felt misplaced. What they suffered was not a tragedy, it was a consequence. They had sown the seeds of greed, and now they were living the harvest. The day Linda called, I was sitting at my kitchen table, sorting through photographs from a recent trip. The phone rang, her name flashing across the screen. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I answered. Her voice was small, tired, carrying none of the arrogance that once colored every word. She said she was sorry. She said they had been wrong. She asked if I could maybe help them just one more time. I listened quietly. My heart softened at the sound of her voice, but my resolve did not. I told her the truth. I told her I could not be her safety net anymore. I still love you, I said, but I won't fund you. Family is not an ATM. Respect is not optional. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be built on something real, not on what you can take. There was silence on the other end, heavy silence, then a broken thank you, and the line went dead. I sat there afterward, staring out the window, letting the moment settle. I did not feel cruel. I did not feel vengeful. I felt free. I whispered to myself, almost in disbelief, I don't need them anymore. I have myself. Days turned into weeks, and my peace deepened. I discovered that life pared down to the essentials is not empty. It is full. My morning started with coffee on the balcony, the newspaper spread open, the light shifting slowly across the sky. Afternoons were for walks in the park, camera in hand. Evenings, I sometimes joined a neighbor for dinner, or I cooked something simple, savoring flavors without hurry. Brian and Linda faded into the background of my days, like characters from a story I once read, but no longer lived. The few times I heard about them, it was always the same: struggles, arguments, compromises. They were isolated, not only from me, but from the community that once looked at them with envy. People respected them no longer. And yet, I chose not to close the door entirely. My granddaughter still came to visit, bright-eyed and curious, asking questions about my camera, tugging at my sleeve to show me her drawings. For her, I kept a space in my life, a thread of connection untangled from the chaos of her parents. I made sure she knew she was loved, that she would always find warmth with me. But with Linda and Brian, the boundary was firm. No money, no rescues, no stepping back into the old trap. The lesson became clear, etched into every quiet evening I spent alone, but content. Blood ties mean little without respect. Love cannot survive if it is constantly trampled by greed. Family should lift each other, not drag each other down. By standing firm, I had reclaimed not just my money, but my dignity. I sometimes look back and wonder if I should have acted sooner, if I should have set boundaries before the betrayal reached such heights. But then I realized that every moment led me here, to this point of clarity. It was painful, yes, but it was also freeing. I know now that self-respect is not selfish. It is survival. One afternoon, as I walked through the park, camera swinging at my side, a flyer caught my attention. It was taped to the community board, announcing a new senior photography club meeting every Thursday evening. I smiled as I read it. It felt like the universe nudging me forward, offering a new circle, a new place to share what I had discovered. That night, I sat at my table, pen in hand, filling out the sign-up form. As I wrote my name, I felt something stir, a quiet excitement, the kind that comes when you realize a new chapter is waiting. My story with Linda and Brian was closing, its lessons carved deep, but my story with myself, with my future, was only beginning. I leaned back, letting the pen rest, and whispered again, more certain this time, I am free. And with that, the weight of betrayal, the sting of loss, the ache of disappointment, all dissolved into something lighter. I knew Chapter 6 of my life was waiting, not filled with conflict, but with discovery, with community, with peace. When I look back now, I almost can't believe how far I have come. Only a year ago I was drowning in the weight of betrayal, broken by the cruelty of my son and his wife, devastated that they had tried to take what was not theirs. $500,000. It wasn't just money, it was my life's work, my safety, my late husband's gift of love and responsibility to me. In Chapter 5, I made the decision that changed everything. I protected my dignity, I moved my savings where their greedy hands could never reach it, and I bought myself freedom. Now, in this new chapter of my life, I can finally breathe without fear. I bought a small 2-bedroom condominium for $220,000. It sits on the 3rd floor of a brick building overlooking the town's central park. When I open the curtains in the morning, I can see the treetops swaying gently in the breeze, the fountains splashing, and children racing their bicycles down the paved paths. Every window lets in sunlight, and at night the glow of the street lamps filters through the leaves, creating a kind of golden haze that feels almost like a blanket tucking me in. Each morning has its rhythm now. I wake up around 7, make myself a pot of coffee in my small but tidy kitchen, and slip on my walking shoes. I stroll around the park with other retirees, some of whom I have already befriended. We wave, we chat about the weather, about the price of groceries, about our grandchildren. Nothing extraordinary, and yet to me it feels like a blessing. The air smells of cut grass and damp earth. Sometimes I pause by the pond to watch the ducks glide smoothly, their little wakes rippling outward. By afternoon, I am back home. I read on the balcony, sometimes a mystery novel, sometimes an old collection of poems my husband once loved. The sound of pages turning, the rustle of leaves, the occasional laughter of children from below. It all mixes into a soundtrack of peace. For the first time in decades, I live for myself. I find myself reflecting more these days, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I realize that respect cannot be bought with money, nor demanded with power. Respect is earned and given, and once it is broken, it is hard to restore. My son, Brian, shattered that bond when he and Linda plotted to seize my savings. They saw me as a weak old woman, easy to manipulate, but they were wrong. In defending myself, I discovered something stronger than any bank account. I discovered self-respect. Self-respect is a treasure that cannot be stolen. You can lose a house, you can lose a car, you can lose every penny in your account. But if you still stand with dignity, you are not poor. As I sat on my balcony one evening, the setting sun painting the sky orange and purple, I whispered to myself, I realized self-respect is the greatest inheritance of all. From time to time, I hear whispers about Brian and Linda. Small-town gossip travels faster than the wind. They no longer live in their large suburban home. They had to give it up after the debts piled too high. Now they rent a modest apartment on the far edge of town. I imagine it is cramped, with thin walls where neighbors hear every argument. They drive an old sedan instead of the shiny SUV Linda once flaunted. Life has forced them to learn the lessons they refused to learn when I tried to teach them with love. Last month, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. It was Brian's. For a moment, my hands trembled. The envelope felt heavier than its weight. I sat at the table, staring at it for several minutes before I dared to open it. Inside was a short note, filled with apologies, explanations, and excuses. He wrote that they were sorry, that they had been under stress, that temptation had clouded their judgment. He begged for a second chance, for forgiveness, for reconciliation. I read it only once. Then I folded it neatly, placed it back into the envelope, and put it in the bottom drawer of my desk. I did not write back. As I whispered to myself that night, I do not need their apology to live my life. I have my peace now. This choice was not made from hatred, but from wisdom. I know that every time I let them back into my circle, I risk my peace. I have worked too hard to rebuild it. My silence is my boundary. My silence is my answer. And yet, life has a way of surprising us in small, gentle ways. A week ago, I received another letter, but this time from the local community center. They invited me to join a group of volunteers who visit and support elderly neighbors who live alone. They said my name had been suggested by a woman I often met during morning walks. I smiled as I read the invitation. My first thought was, I am old myself. What help could I give? But then I realized that maybe, precisely because I am old, because I have lived through betrayal and pain and found dignity, I have something valuable to share. So I said yes. Yesterday I attended my first meeting. We sat in a circle of folding chairs in a bright room that smelled faintly of coffee and cookies. Some volunteers were in their 40s, others, like me, were well into their 60s and 70s. They talked about checking in on neighbors, delivering groceries, and making phone calls to those who feel isolated. It was simple work, but I could see the light in their eyes. It wasn't about grand gestures, it was about human connection. I introduced myself quietly, and when someone asked what had brought me there, I simply said, "I've learned that respect is the most important gift we can give one another. I want to share that." They nodded, and in that moment, I felt like I belonged to something greater again. As the days pass, my life grows richer in ways money cannot measure. My mornings are filled with the laughter of new friends. My afternoons carry the peace of books and tea. My evenings glow with the comfort of knowing I am exactly where I need to be. Every choice I made, even the painful ones, led me here. And yet I still think of Brian and Linda sometimes, not with anger, but with a kind of distant sorrow. They had the chance to value family, respect, and honesty, but they chose greed instead. Now they live in the shadow of those choices. Maybe one day they will truly learn. Maybe one day they will understand that dignity is priceless. For parents like me, the lesson is clear. Do not sacrifice your entire life for children who show no gratitude, who treat you as a wallet instead of a person. Love them, yes, but protect yourself too. Set boundaries. Teach them that respect is part of love. For children, the lesson is even sharper. Do not mistake your parents' sacrifices for weakness. Do not think their savings or their property are yours to claim. Earn your path. When you betray their trust, you not only lose money or inheritance, but you also lose their heart. And once lost, a parent's heart is harder to regain than any fortune. And for all of us, in this modern world where money and status often blind us, we must remember the truth. Character is everything. A strong character, built on respect and honesty, will carry us further than any bank account. Greed may win for a moment, but dignity wins for a lifetime. One evening, sitting on my balcony, watching the last light fade, I whispered aloud, "Every day now is proof that I chose dignity over exploitation." The words echoed in the quiet, and I felt tears of gratitude well in my eyes. I will not pretend life is perfect. There are lonely nights. There are moments when I miss the son I once thought I had. But then I remind myself that family is not defined only by blood. Family is the people who respect you, who stand beside you without trying to steal from you, who see your worth even when you are old and gray. That is the legacy I want to leave. Not money, not property, but respect. And so I close this chapter of my life with peace in my heart. I may never speak to Brian and Linda again. That is their loss, not mine. I will spend the years I have left walking in the park, helping neighbors, drinking tea on my balcony, and cherishing the dignity I fought so hard to reclaim. Because in the end, character is the one inheritance no one can steal, and respect is the only true gift worth passing on. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.